This class is on the topic of friendship and fellowship. And just a heads up, I kind of want this to be a little bit discussion based. So feel free to interrupt me anytime with questions or comments. And we're going to also have some specific discussion portions a couple times throughout the class. So yeah. Okay. So why is this topic of friendship and fellowship so important? Well, the Bible is full of warnings and examples of friendships, both good and bad, that have had major impacts on people's lives. Here's some verses. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. And then Proverbs 12:26. The righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. And Proverbs 18. The one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Yeah. So there's this saying that you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And don't totally buy into that, but it definitely has some truth to it. And you can see from these verses that it's definitely true. Your friends can be some of your greatest influences for both good and evil in your life. Okay, so to start, I think it's kind of interesting to look at how the world would define friendship versus how the Bible would define friendship. So here's just some funny definitions I found online. Some of them kind of serious, some of them funny, but it kind of just revolves around pleasure or fun, or I get in the top one, non-existence. But yeah. Yeah. So this is kind of how the world would define friendship. Kind of silly, but yeah. And yeah, so this is kind of the first discussion portion. What comes to mind when you hear the word friend? Just the first thing that pops into your head.
David and Jonathan.
Yeah, we're going to talk about David and Jonathan. What?
Yeah, Jesus said, "You are my friends if you do keep my commandments."
Yep.
And Abraham was a friend of God.
Yeah.
I think if you're just talking in general terms, Gabe, I think a friend is somebody that you can rely on, that you can count on to be honest and open with you and care for you.
Yeah.
To be a help.
And Gabe, how about somebody you can relate to, someone you can relate with?
Yes.
So here's a second question. What do you think the purpose of a friendship is? Anybody?
Fellowship.
Yep. Fellowship, yep.
There has to be mutual benefit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Yep.
Gabe, I'd say support.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Separation from loneliness.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, those. Oops. Come on. Oh, there we go.
I think a friend loves us at all times.
So those are all really good. So here's a couple things that I came up with. So the first thing would be following Jesus' example of laying down our lives for each other. So John 15 verses 12-13. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than you, to lay down one's life for one's friend. So this can kind of have double meanings, because you think of Jesus dying for our sins, but then not only that, but he also lived for us. So laying down one's life can kind of have a double meaning, because we don't often have to just straight up die for somebody, but we can lay down our life in the sense that we can dedicate our lives to being there for someone and helping someone, inconveniencing ourselves to be with someone. And the second kind of idea I had was encouraging each other in our walk of faith. Hebrews 10:24, and let us consider how to stir one another up to love and good works. You know, there's a lot of different ways that friends can help each other to stay encouraged. Next one, speak the truth in love. Sometimes we have to hear stuff that we don't want to hear, and friends can be good for that. So Proverbs 27 verses 5 and 6 says, better is an open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds of a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. So, yeah. The final example is to help us when we fall. Ecclesiastes 4 verses 9 and 10. Two are better than one, because they have good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. So these are kind of, there's definitely other things, but these are kind of 4 kind of general, I guess, ideas that kind of that try to grasp at the purpose of a friendship. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is some examples of friendships in the Bible. Like I think Jim said, David and Jonathan. That's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. And so here are some different examples. Different examples of friendships, both good and bad, in the Bible. So we're going to start with David and Jonathan. I think this is kind of the go-to example that everybody thinks of when you think of a friendship in the Bible. So their story gives a really good example of the first purpose on the list, which was following Jesus' example by laying down our lives for each other. Because here, I'll show you what I mean. Reading from 1 Kings 12. David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life. David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh, and Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh, and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul my father also knows this. And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. So not only had Jonathan likely risked his life to protect David here, but these verses also highlight how he was willing to lay down his life in a different way. He says, you will be king over Israel. Think about what that would mean for Jonathan. He probably grew up his whole life, the prince, knowing that he would be king one day, and prepping his whole life to be king. By willingly giving the throne to David, he was giving up his life for his friend. Okay, so our next example is Rehoboam and his friends. This is kind of both a good and bad example. So I'll show you what I mean. Reading from 1 Kings chapter 12. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was yet alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant to this people, and today you will serve them, and speak good words to them when you answer them, and they will be your servants forever. But he abandoned this counsel that the old men gave him, and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him, and stood before him. And he said to them, what do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father has put on us? And the young men who had grown up with him said to him, "Thus shall you speak to this people who said to you, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us.' Thus you shall say to them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's thighs.' And now, whereas your father laid on a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." So one of the main purposes of a friend, as I said before, is to tell you stuff that you don't want to hear sometimes to help lead you on the right path. And Rehoboam almost did that. He went to the people that were older and wiser than him to get advice. But rather than taking the good advice, he went on to find advice from somebody that would tell him what he wanted to hear, his friends. Ironically, the old people whose advice he despised were better friends to him than the young men he had grown up with. And we all know the consequences that arose from this situation. Okay. The next example I'm going to look at is another kind of good example of a good and bad friendship is Job's 3 friends. So when Job's 3 friends, I'm reading from Job chapter 2. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zorah the Nahemathite. They made an appointment together to come show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept, and tore their robes, and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. So Job's friends here demonstrate that aspect of that we talked about before of helping each other through hard times. They came here to comfort him and build him up in a time of need. If all they had done was sit there in silence and grieve with him, then it would have been a great example. But as we all know, as soon as they opened their mouths, things went wrong. So these were just a few examples that came to mind when preparing this. Does anyone else have any examples they can think of? Any general thoughts or comments? Any good examples or bad examples? So, in conclusion, a friendship is a precious gift from God that can bring joy, support, and encouragement to our lives. But we have to be careful because man can so easily twist good things into tools for evil. As we seek to cultivate friendships based on godly principles, we have to remember these examples that God gave us and have to work together to follow Jesus, the ultimate example of friendship, laying down his life for us.